King Draven Ashgrave hated auctions. He hated the smell of perfume trying too hard, the fake smiles of nobles who wanted him to notice them, and the way every Omega on that stage looked more like a trophy than a person. But tradition was tradition, and the blood moon was only weeks away. If he did not choose a mate before then, the council would choose one for him. So he sat in his private box, arms crossed, jaw tight, and waited for the night to end. The auction house was packed. Torches burned along the walls, throwing long shadows across the crowd. Nobles whispered behind painted fans. Somewhere below, a girl walked onto the stage wearing a dress too big for her, her head down, her shoulders pulled in like she was trying to disappear. The announcer barely looked at his notes. Lot number 12, no pack, no record, no special traits listed. He said it fast, like he wanted to move on to something more interesting. Starting bid, 1 silver coin. Laughter rolled through the room. 1 silver coin was almost an insult. Somewhere in the crowd, a noblewoman snorted into her wine. Draven did not laugh. He looked at the girl. Really looked. She stood straighter than an Omega, with nothing to offer should stand. Her chin lifted, just barely, when the laughter hit her. She was not looking at the floor out of shame. She was looking at the floor because she did not want anyone to see her eyes. He raised his hand before he decided to. 1 silver, he said. The room went silent so fast, it was almost funny. Then the whispers started, sharper this time. The king, buying the cheapest Omega in the building, the one nobody wanted. Somebody at the back actually laughed out loud before catching themselves. The announcer blinked at him like he'd misheard. Your Majesty, there are far better lots coming. Lot 15 has royal blood on her mother's side. I said 1 silver, Draven repeated, and something in his voice ended the conversation. Nobody outbid a king, not even for fun. The girl on the stage did not smile, did not cry, did not do any of the things people expected an Omega to do when a king bought her for less than the price of a loaf of bread. She just nodded once, like she'd expected exactly this, and let the guards lead her off the stage. Her name was Mira. He learned that much on the ride back to the castle, in a carriage that felt too small for the silence sitting inside it. She answered his questions with as few words as possible. Yes, no, I don't know. She did not ask him a single question back, not even the obvious one. Why did you buy me? And that, more than anything, told him she already had a theory and didn't like it. He watched her hands the whole ride. She kept them folded in her lap, still, too still, like stillness was something she'd trained herself to do. When the carriage hit a rock in the road and jolted hard, her whole body went rigid for half a second before she caught herself and softened again, like flipping a switch. Draven filed that away without saying anything. The castle staff didn't hide their opinions well. He heard them before he saw them. The guards outside her new chambers whispering to each other about the king's charity case. The maids exchanging looks like they'd already decided who she was and what she was worth. Mira walked past all of it, with her spine straight and her eyes forward, and Draven realized she'd probably had a lot of practice ignoring people who underestimated her. That night, alone in his study, he pulled the paperwork from the auction house. It was thin, too thin. An Omega's file usually ran pages: lineage, health records, pack history, even old-school records if she'd had a normal upbringing. Mira's file was 3 pages, and 2 of them were blank forms that had simply never been filled out. No parents listed, no birthplace, no pack affiliation, just a name, an age, and a note that said found, unclaimed, found, not born, not raised, found. He should have let it go. A king had 100 better uses for his time than digging into the background of an Omega who'd cost him 1 silver coin. But something about the word found sat wrong in his chest, like a splinter he couldn't stop pressing his tongue against. Over the next few days he watched her without meaning to make it obvious. She flinched when the guards moved too fast near her, but she never flinched at loud noises, only sudden movement, only hands. She ate with her back to the wall whenever she had a choice about where to sit, and once, when a serving girl dropped a tray of dishes behind her, Mira was 3 steps toward the nearest exit before the sound had even finished echoing, moving like her body knew the drill before her mind caught up. That wasn't fear, that was training. He found her in the castle library on the 4th night, standing at a shelf she clearly wasn't supposed to have access to, running her finger along the spines of books that weren't meant for Omegas, old texts on wolf law, territory disputes, bloodline records going back 200 years. "Looking for something?" he asked. She didn't jump. That surprised him more than anything else. She just closed the book slowly and set it back on the shelf, exactly where it had come from, like she'd already memorized where everything belonged. "Just curious," she said, "about wolf law, about a lot of things." He let that sit for a moment. Most Omegas from the auction house can't read at all. The ones who can, read love stories, not territory law. Something flickered across her face, gone before he could name it. "Maybe I'm not most Omegas." "No," he said quietly, "I'm starting to think you're not." She left the library without another word, and he stood there a long time after she'd gone, looking at the spot on the shelf where the book had been. The next clue came from an unlikely place. His old healer, a wolf named Odalis who'd served 3 kings before him and had no patience for secrets. She examined Mira for a standard health check, the kind every new mate went through, and came to Draven's study afterward with her mouth pressed into a thin line. "Her scent glands have been suppressed," Odalis said, "for years, not months." "The auction house uses suppressant potions on all the Omegas," Draven said. "That's standard. Not like this." Odalis crossed her arms. "The auction house potions leave a clean mark, easy to reverse. What's on her is scar tissue. Homemade. Somebody's been hiding that girl's scent since she was young enough that the damage is permanent. Nobody does that to protect an Omega's modesty, Your Majesty. People hide a scent when they don't want it recognized." Draven sat very still. "Recognized by who?" he asked. Odalis only shook her head. "That's your mystery to solve, not mine. But I'll tell you this much. Whoever raised that girl was not trying to make her marketable for an auction house. They were trying to make her invisible." That night, Draven didn't sleep. He sat in his study with old maps spread across the desk, tracing pack borders that had shifted and changed over the last 20 years, thinking about wars that had ended before he was old enough to understand them, families that had disappeared from record books the way a stone disappears into a lake, a splash, some ripples, and then nothing. There had been a war. Every wolf kingdom knew the story in outline, if not in detail. 20 years ago, a rival bloodline had challenged the throne and lost, and the losing family had been erased. Not exiled, not imprisoned, simply removed from every record as if they'd never existed. Draven's own father had signed off on it. He'd been a child when it happened, too young to understand what erased really meant, until years later, when he'd asked an old advisor why a certain family crest no longer appeared anywhere in the kingdom's history, and gotten only silence in return. He looked at the blank pages in Mira's file, found, unclaimed. He thought about a girl who could read wolf law, who sat with her back to walls, who carried scars that had nothing to do with an auction house. He thought, what if she wasn't found? What if she was hidden? The next morning, he called for her directly. No guards, no witnesses, just the 2 of them in his study with the door closed. "I need to ask you something," he said. "And I need the truth." Mira's hands folded in her lap again, that same careful stillness. "All right. Who raised you?" For a long moment she said nothing at all. Then, quiet. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." "Why?" "Because I bought a girl for 1 silver coin, who reads territory law and flinches at hands but not sound, and has scars on her scent glands that my healer says are years old and homemade. That's not a story about nobody. That's a story about somebody who was very, very careful." Mira's jaw tightened. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked less like a servant bracing for punishment and more like a person deciding whether to trust him. "My mother used to tell me stories," she said finally, "about a family that had everything and lost it in one night. She never used names. She said names were dangerous. She said if anyone ever asked where I came from, I should say I didn't know, because not knowing was safer than knowing." She looked up at him, I was 6, the first time she covered my scent with crushed herbs, and told me never to let it come back clean. I didn't understand why until I was older. By then, it was already scar tissue, too late to undo. Safer from who? I don't know their names either, Mira said. Just that they killed my father, and would have killed me and my mother too, if they'd found us. My mother died 4 winters ago. I've been on my own since. The auction house picked me up off the road outside a border town. I'd run out of places to hide, and options, and food. A small, humorless smile. I let them sell me, because at least an auction house has walls and food. I didn't expect anyone to actually buy me. I definitely didn't expect it to be you. Draven sat back slowly. What's your mother's family name? He asked. Careful. Quiet. Mira hesitated so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Voss, she said. Before it was Voss, it was something else. She only told me the old name once, when she thought she was dying young and wanted me to know it before she went. Rayeth. The name hit Draven like a physical thing. Rayeth. The family his father had erased 20 years ago. The bloodline that had once challenged the throne and lost everything for it. A name that existed nowhere in official record anymore, scrubbed so thoroughly that Draven himself had only ever heard it once, from an old advisor's slip of the tongue years before, immediately followed by a warning never to repeat it. He was looking at the last living Rayeth, sitting in his study, wearing a servant's dress, bought for 1 silver coin because nobody in that auction house had known, or maybe somebody had known exactly, and had made very sure nobody would bid on her at all. Mira, he said slowly, I need you to understand something about the family who almost bought you tonight, and the family whose name you were told to hide. They aren't unrelated stories. They're the same story. He told her everything he knew. The war, the erasure, the reason her mother had spent a childhood teaching a little girl how to disappear. By the time he finished, Mira's hands weren't folded anymore. They were gripping the arms of her chair so hard her knuckles had gone pale. Your father, she said. Your father did this. Yes, and you're telling me this because you deserve to know what you survived, Draven said, and because I think somebody in this castle already knows who you are, and paid to keep the auction house from ever letting anyone find out. Nobody prices a girl at 1 silver coin by accident. Somebody wanted you sold cheap, sold quiet, sold to someone who wouldn't ask questions. Mira went very pale. Someone here. In your court. I think so, and I think we need to find out who, before they realize their plan didn't work the way they wanted. It took 2 weeks of quiet digging to find the thread, and when they found it, it wasn't even that well hidden, just well protected, by people who'd assumed nobody would ever think to look. A payment, years old, routed through 3 different accounts before landing at the auction house that had sold Mira, a bribe to keep her listed as an unranked, valueless lot, no matter how she scored on any evaluation, and to make sure she was never, under any circumstances, sold to anyone who might recognize the name Rayeth if it ever slipped out. The money traced back to Lord Cassian Thorne, one of Draven's own council members, a man who'd sat across from him at dinner 100 times, who'd voted for Mira's family's erasure 20 years ago as a much younger advisor, and who apparently still lived in fear of what might happen if a Rayeth ever grew old enough to ask for what her family had lost. When they confronted him, Thorne didn't even try very hard to deny it. He'd expected to be found out eventually, he said. He'd only hoped it would be after he was dead. She was 6 years old when we destroyed her family, Draven said, his voice low and dangerous in a way the whole council room went still to hear. 6. And you spent this kingdom's resources making sure she'd disappear into an auction stage instead of ever knowing who she was. I was protecting the stability of this kingdom, Thorne said, though even he didn't sound like he believed it anymore. You were protecting yourself, Mira said, stepping forward for the first time, her voice steady in a way that made half the council look at her differently than they had a moment before. There's a difference. Thorne was stripped of his title and his lands that same week, tried under the kingdom's own laws for the bribery and the decades-old cover-up, and sentenced to exile, a mercy Draven gave only because executing him would have made Mira's return to public life look like an act of revenge instead of an act of justice. She didn't ask for revenge. She asked for the truth to be recorded. Finally, in the official histories her family had been erased from. Draven gave her that and more. He stood before the full court 2 weeks later and did something no king in living memory had done. He named Mira publicly, not as a rescued Omega bought cheap at auction, but as Mira Rayeth, last living heir of a bloodline his own father had wrongly destroyed. He watched the nobles who had laughed at her 1 silver coin bid go pale, one by one, as they understood exactly whose daughter they'd been mocking. "I am not asking this court to forgive what was done to her family," he said. "I am telling this court what was done, so it is never again pretended that it wasn't. And I am telling you that whatever comes next between us, it happens because she chooses it, not because a crown or a bloodline or a silver coin decided it for her." He turned to Mira, in front of the entire court, and asked her, not told her, not decreed it, asked, if she would consider standing beside him at the blood moon, not as a purchase, not as an obligation, but as an equal who'd earned her place there by surviving what should have broken her. Mira looked at him for a long moment. The court held its breath. "I spent my whole life being told to disappear," she said finally. "I'm done disappearing." A small, real smile, the first one he'd seen from her since the auction stage. "Yes, I'll stand beside you, but not because you bought me, because I want to." The blood moon bonding happened 3 weeks later, and the whole kingdom turned out to watch, not out of curiosity about the cheap Omega the king had bought on a whim, but out of respect for the woman who'd survived a war meant to erase her and come out the other side standing taller than anyone who'd tried to bury her name. Years later, people still told the story of the auction house lot that went for 1 silver coin, but by then, nobody told it as a joke about a worthless girl nobody wanted. They told it as the story of how the cheapest bid in the room turned out to be the most valuable thing the kingdom ever found.